Hi,
Hey,
welcome to this week's podcast, Aircast.
they all work.
Yes, that's the nice thing about all these cast things. You can just do just about anything you want,
No,
almost.
this is the week after Labor Day.
Yes, and I think our Labor Day podcast didn't hit very many high points. I don't think,
No, it was pretty depressing.
and I think we should probably try and do maybe a little bit better this week. Yeah, there's got to be some high points here somewhere.
Okay, what's the high point for this week, Bob?
Well, I think this week we should be talking about the lack or the loss of democracy and the move to idiocracy.
Idiocracy.
Yes.
Oh, is there such a word?
Apparently, if you Google it, it comes up.
Okay.
And if you look at the definition, it sure hits a lot of buttons.
Huh. Before we move on, to tell our viewers, if you like what we do, to subscribe, please push the subscribe button and do give us a like. There's a
Mhm.
button somewhere. It's different on Rumble and it's different on YouTube, but they both have buttons you can push. So we'd appreciate it. So we want to know if anybody's actually listening to what we have to say.
Well, that's what I say. We've got to make it a little bit lighter. There might
Yes.
have been some people looking for blunt razor blades and hot water last week, but
Yeah. Well, idiocracy. Well, it was certainly interesting. What'd you say? There was another word that you saw was merit, no, meritocracy.
meritocracy or something, wasn't it? We were talking about pre-production, how that whole thing of you earn things because you deserved it, not because you fit a particular set of blocks or check marks or tick marks.
Right, because merit is not in
Mm-hmm.
what it was. And
Apparently,
well, yeah, because it was we were looking at that report by two researchers on the immigration
and we'll
trend.
preface that. Yeah, preface that with looking at the immigration process in Canada.
Right, which apparently is too merit based for these two characters.
Yes, and it was one of those things where they didn't quite understand, but it probably had something to do with being too radical or too right wing or too conservative. You're not looking at screening people in because they meet requirements. It's just maybe a little bit of the woke nonsense on that as well.
Well, it's the woke part was that's, by the way, that just to put lightness into the discussion. That noise you hear is my dogs running around with a squeaky toy. As you can see, we're having a slow day in news today.
Yeah.
But the one that was interesting for the meritocracy was this business that if we were to continue to select people based on their skill, education,
Language abilities.
language, motivation, and so forth, or even relations already existing,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not a good idea, apparently.
No. I maybe they're time travelers and they know better. I don't know, but it sure doesn't seem to be a good
Well, they're
thought.
I'm just pulling it up here because I had to read this because it's so avant-garde, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But these two researchers are called Tanny and Kaiser, and they have reached the conclusion that in the US, successful immigrants feel threatened by later immigrants who arrive in an unruly, unlimited way and who might attract negative attention to the entire group. And they based this theory on the World Value Survey, which suggests that anti-immigrant views among American immigrants concern unemployment, crime, and terrorism risk in particular. Reading their paper, one begins to wonder if it would be more pertinent to Canada than the US, because in their view, one answer would be to preserve the remorseless, quasi-meritocratic, that's a new word for it, Bob, meritocratic selectivity of our immigration policy so that people continue to support it. In other words, you may not know this, but Canada's points-based immigration system traditionally made Canada an idol of right-wing US immigration reformers who would otherwise dismiss Canada as full of socialist creeps and drones. So apparently this lack of selectivity and basically kicking the door wide open at the border to immigration so that anybody who, whether they are or not refugees or whether they are or not students, and this new guest worker group will be very much welcome to fill in jobs that no one else wants to do. But it says that this loose policy probably has a secret intention of creating more Canadian liberal voters. But brothers and sisters, that is absolutely not the way it's necessarily going to work out, according to Colby Cash of the National Post. So what do you think of that?
Wonder if their student debts are paid off.
Have I got you? Have you been boondoggled yet? Because that's a boondoggle.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So essentially, these two researchers think that no rules is the best way to function in a society.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's no rules inbound to immigrants, migrants, refugees, whatever, because they're not going to be subject to rules, then there are not going to be any rules when you're already inside the country, right?
Well, and I guess that's where we, well, at least where I was thinking when we started this, is it seems to be that the idiocracy is well entrenched.
Appears to be. The other one is just, again, an immigration, migration, refugee students issue that came up this week, post Labor Day, is Canada has something in the order of 900,000 students in the country at the moment. The big problem, of course, is that they're running into the same issue that ordinary Canadians are running into, which is the cost of living going straight up, despite the fact the economy is booming, and housing is not there, right?
Yeah.
To house them, and they have discovered that it costs money to travel in Canada, eat in Canada.
Yeah.
And a lot of these students have been basically hoodwinked into coming here, paying lots of money for tuition at various learning institutions, some less learning, more predatory than teaching. And they're now having to complain to whoever will listen that they didn't expect to pay so much for housing here, and that they should be subsidized by the Canadian government or the province or the municipality because they were essentially conned into this, and it's not fair. You know, they're spending enormous amounts of money to attend these colleges and universities and trade things, trade schools, and they can't afford housing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to make matters worse, they're being coached to go to food banks by some of these same groups that conned them into coming to Canada because they don't have any money. So
yeah. Well, I guess in keeping with the theme, this goes back many, many years, and I can't say that I'm old enough really to remember the voting process and the gnashing of teeth to try and get Newfoundland to join the Confederation. And the guy that eventually did manage that, Smallwood,
Yes.
his name,
Joey Smallwood.
Joey Smallwood. He was once rumored to have been talking to a bunch of people about this whole issue and what it would be good for, bad for Canada, and how these people should go and vote. And they said, but we don't even live in Newfoundland. We're just visitors. It doesn't matter. Give me 5 minutes. I'll figure out a way for you to drop a vote. And I wonder if that's really where this is going with these, these people wanting, well, the government's got to do this. And with the idiocracy that's running the place, are they thinking that we'll give them the money and then they'll vote for us?
Well, there's things that this past week, since the Labor Day depressing broadcast, was the cost of living continues to rise. The Bank of Canada raised interest rates, which immediately has a dampening effect on inflation, but it also kills the value of the dollar, because if other jurisdictions raise interest rates, Canada's dollar will decline against it. So your cost of purchasing stuff, which is a great percentage of our economy is linked to the American economy in exports and imports. Well, we're going to, Canada will be hammered financially.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that. Then you have the idiocracy of filling the lifeboat of the immigration lifeboat with even more people. The logic being with these fools that if you put more people into the lifeboat, it won't sink. Well, that's quite, that's so illogical, but that's what they're doing. And they're making up stories about how if we have enough people here, it will make Canada a rich country. Well, here's an idea. If we use that logic, then India and China would have to be the richest countries on earth, because they have over 1 billion people each.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's how you generate wealth, then great. But you know what? It doesn't look like it works out quite.
Well, either that, or maybe, as we had some discussions on before, maybe it's the precursor to try and get a North American economic union going, where we're all thinking on the same page, and we take the 360 million Americans and 40 million Canadians, and I'm sorry, I don't know how many people are in Mexico.
I think 60 or 80. I'd have to look it up on the fly here, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, so now we're getting very, very close to having maybe 500 million people in this economic zone. Would that make us any better?
Yeah, and if this economic zone, which would essentially negate any sovereignty between the three countries, well then, under what rubric of democracy would we function? Okay, so this would be interesting, right?
Well, it would be. I mean, in Canada, we've been running on the Ollie Oxenfree program for a long time, but
which is called the parliamentary system, where you have somebody who has 28% of the popular vote running a country.
and of that 28% of the popular vote, probably 80% comes from one particular province. So
yes, and then you have the great constitutional republic, which apparently its constitution is being changed monthly, or at least appears to be, and being challenged. I mean, the land of the lawsuits, right, because of that approach. And then our friends in Mexico, who are, according to many, is nothing more than a criminal state run by crime bosses. The president of Mexico might disagree with that, but I've heard,
yeah,
I'm sure you have too, is that one of the biggest problems with the U.S.-Mexican relations, apart from the open border, which is not Mexico's fault. If your neighbor left his door open and all your other neighbors went through his house, why would I stop them? Would be the logic there.
yeah.
Fentanyl, the business, which is apparently killing thousands of people every month in the U.S. and Canada, for that matter. In fact, you were telling me that in British Columbia, the number of people dying from drug overdoses.
Yeah, over 6 a day. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So the way to solve that problem, according to certain quarters in the U.S., is to having the Marines land in various places and by Black Hawk helicopters and taking out the cartel leadership. I don't know if anybody asked President of Mexico whether he thought that was a good idea.
Well, yeah. And you sit back and you think, oh, it might seem like a good idea at the time. Maybe wouldn't work out quite that well. But you got to sit back and think, well, if Mexico's president is content to have his country run the way he is, perhaps he's being honest. And I mean, are the criminals that are in the United States and in Canada that are behind government still operating behind a curtain, or the veil of secrecy, or whatever it is, and we're just not acknowledging it? I don't know.
Well, I'm afraid that given the current environment of the justice system and how it functions, the law enforcement system, how it carries out its responsibilities in the US primarily, but also to some extent in Canada, leaves a lot to be desired. You can't exactly go around pontificating about how laws should be enforced when we ourselves, both these countries, at the moment, have kind of a checkered way of doing it.
Well, and that's true, and at the risk of sounding perhaps too right wing, why is it that we have two people who have been charged with not even a criminal offense going to a court system where one of the people that have been charged has spent more time in jail than the average criminal has spent in any jurisdiction in the country? It doesn't make a lot of sense.
No. And whether you are a proponent of the left or the right, particularly in the United States, it seems that there's so I have to be careful, choose my words here. When you take the justice system to try and take out your political enemies, whether you like them or not, that does not bode well for
on either side of the coin.
Because if my side can do it to you, your side's going to do it to me. And that's what that happens in really third-rate, third world countries, not in sophisticated democracies. So they're playing with a box of matches, these guys, so-called politicians. These octogenarians who are scary.
And I'd have to say, maybe they're actually playing with that box of matches inside of a gas-filled room. I mean, it's not going to bode well. And I don't care whether you're on the left side of the coin or the right side of the coin. When you start dealing with issues that become political, and again, whether you agree with the Freedom Convoy or whether you disagree with the Freedom Convoy that went on in Canada, taking these people to court for basically demonstrating and then trying to manufacture cause against that, you're politicizing the courts. And where does that stop? Well, who's going to decide what is correct or incorrect, or are we going into the thought police where we think you're going to do this, so you're going to be convicted and sent away?
In fact, some of these cases are based on that particular theory that you're guilty by thinking about doing something. Well, I was thinking about robbing the bank, but I decided not to. Yeah, but you thought about it, so you're going to jail. Really? Okay, this is where Huxley and Orwell come a convergence here between these two authors of many decades ago who painted a pretty dystopian place, and this is all coming to fruition here with some of the
Yeah.
crazy stuff that when you weaponize law enforcement and you essentially corrupt the justice system for political purposes, that does not end well.
No, no.
Uh,
And again,
we're just
thinking,
two guys, we're not lawyers. We're not even, just observers
well,
talking about the
you had
fence.
mentioned in pre-production, we are retired, and we do have more time on our hands maybe than what the average John Q public does. So we can look at things, we can read things. You were talking about reading Churchill's book of how did Britain get sucked into the Second World War, which led into the Kennedy book, which said, yeah, you got sucked in because of, and are we doing the same thing here? There's lots of books out there and lots of history out there where you can look at what has transpired in the past and transpose it into what we are doing and how that's going to look to generations down the road, right? I mean, it reminds me of a story. We were talking with friends of ours about the huge fire that was in Lahaina, and there had been fires there before. And when our friends were there, they were watching the firefighting activities going on, and the helicopters coming in, filling up with water, and going over and dousing the flames. And the friends were all law enforcement, and there's a lot of, dare I say it, there's a lot of black humor that goes on in law enforcement because that's sometimes the way it can be dealt with.
Yes.
And the comment on this is, what happens if they go out there and they scoop up a guy who's scuba diving, and then they throw him over this fire, and nobody knows, nobody figures out, but 100 years from now, somebody is going to be looking at this, they're going to come across this scuba diver who's 450 feet up the cliff, and they're going to jump to the conclusion that sea levels in the late 1990s and early 2000s was at least 450 feet higher than it is now. We just don't think of what we're doing and how it's going to be processed in the future, because we tend to base things on what we think we know, not what we actually know.
Yeah, and we also get caught up in our own hubris, particularly about issues that we would rather not confront, but in fact bury it with lies, misinformation, disinformation. The best misinformation, disinformation is called propaganda, which comes out of the mouths of spokespersons of government and corporations, because and you don't want to be too cynical, but the fire in Hawaii is a classic example of a mystery that deepens with every passing day, and not the mainstream media talks about it, but you have to go on the internet and discover that the people are asking questions and they're not getting answers from the people who should be giving them honest, transparent responses. So
that's a bit like our discussion last week in John Q. Public, and where did that term come from? And I think I've been thinking about it more, I guess. And before John Q. Public the public was pretty quiet. They listened to what was going on and they didn't question. And now I think it's turning around that the people are starting to think, I don't think we can trust these people, and we have to start asking questions again.
no, and history, apart from the kind that we'll talk about with regard to Churchill's book and Kennedy's book in the 40s and 30s, is the culture of movies of the 30s and 40s. And that, to me, there are two movies that are old black and white movies. One is Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, which really does resonate with me in many ways. if you look at what's happening today, excuse me, because the corruption, it's evident. While that was a movie, you know, not supposed to represent real people, it's fictional and coincidental and all those other words you use on movies, at the beginning or the end, was really on the money for its time, but I think it's worth looking at today and in that context. And the other movie is Gaslight, which is also from that era, about how you drive people towards a certain position or way of thinking. These are two movies which, okay, they're entertainment, but under that veneer of entertainment are some real ugly truths.
Well, that's true. Yeah. And it used to be like the TV shows, right? Joe Friday. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. Maybe we shouldn't be changing the names anymore. Maybe we should just, let everybody's dirty laundry be aired.
Well, yeah, but some of it's so salacious and who cares? I mean, we really have sometimes dredged up sewer stuff, and supposedly in the interests of truth. And when in many cases that's not what it's for. It's basically to get bait click material on the internet or sell movies or what have you. I don't know. But it's clearly an issue where we need to press for more honesty, transparency.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe Mr. Smith will go to Washington. Maybe people will understand what gaslighting means in the context of that movie and how we're getting gaslit every day here. The other one is like the word hubris, which is well known. We have to stop thinking, particularly in the context of North America and perhaps even the European Union countries, that we don't have all the answers. We're not the smartest on the block anymore. We're not the most powerful anymore. We have squandered a lot of that over the last few decades in the name of equity and solidarity and inclusion and diversity and all. We are no longer that which was seen as the shiny light on the hill for the poor and the oppressed and whatever. It's just we're not there anymore. We need to move back towards that, but it requires some serious rethink going forward and some hard work.
Well, absolutely, yeah. It actually means that we're going to have to get down, roll up our sleeves, and get our hands dirty. And
that's something that is not happening, at least not in our neighborhood. Not by our neighborhood, I mean the Western world seems to think that we can continue to live off the avails of low-paid Asians or South Americans or whatever, and then get our noses out of joint when suddenly you discover that they make better cell phones than we do, or they drive better cars than we do, we being the collective West, or that countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia decide that, well, we're not going to pump as much oil, so now it's going to cost us more money, and we don't have any oil. What do you mean we don't have? There's all kinds of energy here, but we've decided for
expedience.
Well, the various cults, whether it's the ones who make money by jacking up the price, or the ones who think we're going to save the planet by taxing everyone into poverty. This is all man-made nonsense that we've foisted upon ourselves, and then we get all worked up over the coalition of other countries who go, you know what, we don't need your movies, we don't need your politics, we don't need your expertise. India puts a satellite on the south pole of the moon, okay, and it hardly makes any news. These people are not running around in sandals and and loincloths, these are countries that are basically beating a path to the future while we're sitting around navel gazing. And so, you know,
Worse yet, we're pontificating about nasal gazing.
that's right. I thought we were going to make this an upbeat show today.
Well, I think it is. I think you're hitting on the right thing there. So that one, we have to get down, get dirty, get our own hands dirty. And two, we're going to have to start looking outside of our own realm and comfort zone into how are these other places doing what they're doing, and seem to be doing it quite well.
And we have to come, I think the other thing is that we have to understand that you don't solve everything with your neighbor by beating up your neighbor. This is, we have to find the art of compromise again, whether it's internally between the left and the right politically, or with our neighbors around the world. This really truly is a multipolar world. And the old institutions like the UN, they don't grasp this. They seem to have gone to a single track, and despite the fact that you have a myriad of flagpoles with flags on it, but in fact, they're trying to make them all the same. And those have to coalesce around one or two or three, and that's how it's got to work. This is a recipe for disaster.
Well, it is, and good old Carl Sagan and the pale blue dot. I mean, just look at the whole overall scheme of things. Really, we can have 8, 10, 12 billion people on this little orb. But in the overall scheme of things, if we don't work together, we don't get along together, then we'll just prove just how insignificant we are in the overall scheme of things.
That's true. In fact, my youngest grandson, we have a joke about science and how what was the earth called before we called it earth, and he came up with a dirt ball floating through space. And then the dirt ball said, and who's on the dirt ball? Well, dirt bags are on the dirt ball. It's kind of funny with talking with the young 10-year-old or 12-year-old about that. But in a sense, we have to look out for this. This is the only dirt ball we got. Okay, and we need to deal with the dirt bags that are basically ruining it for those 12 billion or how many billion we got on the planet. It needs to be fixed, and we need to move to a more principled, transparent, and we got to stop hating each other. This has got to stop.
Absolutely, yeah. We gotta work together, start working together. Like if India can put the man, the next man on the moon, and China can do that with nanotechnology that is a little bit superior, then could you imagine? Could you just think for a moment if we could amalgamate all this technology, what good it would do?
Stop the hubris, because yesterday I read that Chinese government has banned the use of iPhones by anybody who works for the government. But that wasn't the big story. The big story is they're replacing it with a phone that is far superior to any iPhone that exists right now. They've come up with a chip which is supposedly so advanced that it has the tech world in Western governments rattled, because how did they get the technology to make a phone that has a chip in it that they haven't figured out how to make here yet? Like, how is that possible? Of course, the hubris again is, how dare they do that?
Yeah. The reality should be, gosh, that's really good. Now, if we had some of that technology and we could put some of our technology together, maybe we would come up with that warp speeds that were on Star Trek, and
maybe spent less time figuring out how to blow each other up, and so we know how to communicate. So anyway, it's that's kind of the optimism that we have to have going forward.
And I'm pretty sure that, well, I don't know. I'm very hesitant to say how much worse can it get, because as I said before, I think there are people out there taking that as a challenge. But I'd like to think that we are moving more towards humanist, I guess. It really doesn't matter where you belong on this planet. You're all part of the planet, and we got to start working together to get it on track again.
Yeah, yeah. With this polarization has to stop. It's got to be a mosaic. It's got to be different dots being connected. As we spoke last week, if our southern global competitors can talk to each other who have had disagreements for literally centuries in some cases, and can come together,
yeah,
then all our hubris and all our historical nonsense going back about how we're as a collective West smarter than anybody else. We got to stop this, because doesn't do us any good. Anyway, that's intellectually for us to go that deep. We're gonna lose we may lose people who are. Well, my head's exploding. What are these guys talking about?
It reminds me of the Gary Larson cartoon. Excuse me, Mr. Smith. The kid sitting in the front of the classroom says, "Can I be excused? My brain is full."
Yes.
And that's probably, I think mine's almost full now, I think.
I think so. And we were going to do a short show today. We're just about at the end of the line here.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we're coming up there. So anyway, yeah, I hope we've made it a little lighter for people, and yeah, please hit the like buttons and subscribe.
Indeed.
We value your opinions.
Like I said, we'll be doing our little juxta comparison between 1930s and 40s and today in the next broadcast, hopefully, rather than one after that. All right.
All right.
Gotta go.
Talk to you soon.
Yeah. Take care.